How to successfully set up yourself and your family for homeschooling part 1. If you haven't watched the preface, go back and watch that so you understand where... If you haven't watched the preface yet, go back a video and watch that so you understand where we're coming from and where we're trying to go. If you've already watched the preface video, then you know in 2022, my family and I made the transition to homeschooling. And as I was going through that process, I kept thinking there has to be a better way to do this. So as I went through, I took notes, I asked questions, I pulled resources, I did research, and then I thought, what can be improved with this process? How would I do this differently if I was going through it again? And what are some of the mistakes that I made? And I used, thing is so unruly, what can be improved, my mistakes, and how I would change the process to do it differently. Took all those ideas together and made a framework for transitioning successfully to homeschool. It's conveniently called a map. Every new homeschooler needs a map. Way to just put this, Today, we're gonna start by talking about what you absolutely should not do when you are starting homeschooling. I made this mistake and I'm sharing it with you today so that you don't make the same. We're starting today, of course, with the A, awareness. Today we're talking about finding your why. Let's define a couple of terms. First of all, your why is your bigger picture idea for why it is you're doing what you're doing. This comes before an approach. An approach is some of these terms you've probably heard thrown around like Montessori, unschooling, a classical approach, and then you have the curriculum. The curriculum is the actual books that you're going to use, the resources, the material. Right now, I can guarantee you that the questions you think that you need answers to are not the questions you need answers to. Things like, what curriculum should I be using? What planner should I be using? How long should we be doing school? Should I join a co-op? These are not the questions to be asking. And let me show you why. Trying to figure out the answers to those questions before figuring out your why is like trying to plan a trip by just throwing a dart at a map. When you plan a trip, you don't start by trying to pick a hotel or trying to figure out where you're going to eat. You start way back by thinking, who do I want to go on this trip? What is the purpose of this trip? Is this a romantic getaway with my husband? Is this a family trip? Do we want to involve the grandparents? Is this a trip just for me to have some alone time and go away for the weekend? Knowing the answers to those bigger whys, the purpose for the trip, informs everything that comes after that. It informs where you might go, when you might go, how long you might stay. So when you're thinking about a why for homeschool, I want you to think about planning a trip. It's a huge myth that the first thing you need is curriculum. This could not be further from the truth. The first thing that you need is your why. Another myth is that you have to give this why a ton of thought, or that it has to be perfect, or that it can't be changed down the road. Another myth is that you can't steal someone else's why. You can absolutely steal someone else's why, but you need a why before you can move forward. Another myth is, I don't have time for this. If you don't land on some sort of why, even if it's just a rough draft, you'll end up with so much more confusion and wasted time and money later down the road. It's also a little like going into the kitchen. When you go into the kitchen to cook something, you usually know why you're there. You know whether you're baking or you're cooking. You know who you're baking or cooking for. You wouldn't just go into the kitchen and just start randomly pulling out ingredients before you knew what you were going to do with them. You have a why for walking into the kitchen, whether it's making cookies to take to mom's night out, or making dinner for the family, or pulling out some snacks for the football game. Why is critical and it has to happen first. When a bad day hits, you'll forget why you're doing this. As you're trying to make decisions throughout videos 2 through 10, it will be so much more difficult if you don't have a why to direct all of this decision making. All right, now, let's tackle mindset. I already know what you're thinking. I don't have time. I gotta pick curriculum. I gotta sign up for things. We gotta go. I also worry that if I stop to figure out this ambiguous, seemingly unnecessary why, it would slow everything else down and I would be behind before I ever even got started. There is a lot of external pressure that comes at you, especially when you're starting out with homeschooling. You may feel pressure from family, from friends, or from society, or from a homeschool convention that you went to prioritize the curriculum above your why. You may also say, Sarah, I have no idea. You may lack some clarity. It's okay to struggle in trying to articulate your why. We're gonna get to that in the A. If you're thinking, I can't put this into words, or I don't have a clear vision, that's normal. This is all new, and you will figure it out. You may also be feeling a fear of judgment. What if you put your true why out there and people think it's stupid or silly or overly ambitious? You might also be thinking that your why has to align with conventional educational standards or whys, and that deviating from that norm is wrong. And that also makes sense because, again, it's new, so it's going to feel a little awkward. It makes sense that you feel all these things. People who sell curriculum have a lot of ad dollars behind them. There's really not anybody selling a why. It's not talked about as much. It's also overwhelming. There is so much curriculum out there, it can feel like that diving into curriculum selection is the only way to manage the overload of options. But if you do that and you dive right into the curriculum options, it leads to ineffectiveness. Without a well-defined why, you might end up selecting curriculum options that actually don't align with your educational goals or with what your kids or you need. You may end up feeling like you are serving the curriculum versus the other way around. So, we're going to get the why in place first. You're going to feel more confident about your decisions when you have a why in place. You're going to feel more motivated. You're going to feel more resilient. When you come across those obstacles of doubt, you have a why to look to remind you of the bigger reason and purpose of what you're doing. How do you make this why? We're to the A. Action. The first thing you need to do when creating a why is do a little bit of self-reflection. You want to think about why. You want to think about why you're homeschooling. This includes not just what your kids need or want from this experience, but also what you want, what your spouse wants, what your whole family wants and needs. Pam Barnhill has a wonderful book that I'll link below. And in the beginning of it, she talks about ways to create your why. One of the ideas I really liked was thinking about what you want your kids to say one day when they're older about their homeschooling experience. Take those phrases, ideas, thoughts, and work backwards from that. If one day, for example, you want them to be able to say, we were allowed to follow our own interest, maybe that's part of your why. You could think about what you want your kids to be able to do as adults. These might be skills, things they love, desires. What do you want them to think about you as a homeschool mom? She uses the idea of one vision. Imagine your child standing in front of you when they're 20, 25, 30 years old, and make a list of what he or she has experienced and what they're capable of. Try to keep the list to 10 or 15 things. This list can inform your why, show you which direction you might want to move in. For example, if you want them to have a great relationship with the great works and thinkers of the Western culture, maybe you include that in your why. Maybe you want your kids one day to say that they were never rushed or pushed and they were allowed to follow their own interests. That could be included in your why. Maybe you want to make sure that you're not always at the table learning, that you're also in the world and you're experiencing field trips and family adventures, travel. Maybe that's included in your why. It's important to remember in your why that you're not looking for outcome goals. You're looking for efforts to be made, the direction that you want to go in, the things that you want to experience, the ways that you want to feel. So you wouldn't want a why that says that we have memorized the entire Bill of Rights. Because in the end, that's not something that you can necessarily control, whether your child can do that or not. You want to keep your why more up here, the 30,000 feet, the bigger ideas, your values, the reasons for doing things. If you're struggling with this, don't be afraid to Google a homeschool why. Pick and choose and Frankenstein together the ideas that you like. You don't have to come up with it all by yourself. Other moms have gone before and done this in beautiful ways, and it's okay to copy what they've already come up with, especially as a starting point, because as you work through this, you'll figure out things that you want to get rid of and things that you want to add. If you start getting in the weeds and you're not sure what is a 30,000 feet idea and a 5-foot idea, just think about being in the kitchen. Think about why you're in the kitchen, the bigger ideas, not what ingredients you need to pull. What ingredients you need to pull would be memorizing a map of the world or knowing what a comma is and how to use it. Knowing why you're in the kitchen, whether you're making dinner or you're baking, is knowing the things like we want our children to be able to comfortably navigate the spoken and the written word. Okay, we made it. We're to the P. Process. After you've written your why, you're going to come back and you're going to reflect on it and you're going to tweak it as necessary. It's not going to be perfect right out the gate, and that's okay. You're going to learn as you go, as you actually start getting the curriculum, getting the school day going, setting up your space. You're going to figure out some things that you want to change with your why. All right, that's it. We did it. The why is set up. Now we can get to the thing that I know you really are excited about, choosing curriculum. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one. One mistake I made was not writing down my why. I just held it up here in my head. I kind of communicated it to my husband and we nodded and went, that's cool. I should have written it down. It's good to have it written down or painted or made into a vision board and put somewhere where everyone can see it and be reminded. It helps to make your decisions literally every day when you have a visual of exactly what you're aiming for. I also made the mistake of downplaying the importance of the why. I literally read a book sitting on the couch. I remember leaning over to Chris and saying, hey, we need a why. And him saying, okay, cool, let's do it. And we talked about it for 5 or 10 minutes, and that was that. Now, that was better than nothing because we had something to go on as we went through the process. But I wish I would have taken more time with it in the beginning instead of continuing on and then having to circle back to it when I realized, oh, I should have taken more time with that. Another mistake I made was thinking I couldn't use someone else's why. Of course you can use someone else's why. They would be honored. Use my why. I would be honored to be the jumping off point for your why. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Okay, those are the mistakes that I made. I hope that saves you from making the same ones.